They called him the greatest wizard of his age, the mind that mastered time, the hand that shaped destiny, the name that echoed through every corner of the magical world, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. But behind the twinkling eyes and gentle smile, behind the silver beard and half-moon spectacles, lay a man burdened by secrets so heavy that even magic could not lift them. Tonight, we peel away the veil of myth and enter the shadows of a life few truly knew. For Dumbledore was not born wise, nor was he always kind. He was shaped by tragedy, by ambition, by choices that scorched his soul and defined the course of wizarding history. The man who became Hogwarts' greatest headmaster once walked paths so dark they threatened to consume him entirely. Before the wars, before the prophecy, before the legend of the boy who lived, there was a family, fractured, proud, and cursed by silence. The Dumbledores of Godric's Hollow were known for their intellect and reclusion, but not their happiness. Percival Dumbledore, a man of fierce principle, and Kendra, his formidable wife, lived in quiet secrecy with their 3 children, Albus, Aberforth, and Ariana. To the neighbors, they seemed ordinary enough, until the day tragedy struck and their home became a fortress of whispers. It began with Ariana. At 6 years old, she witnessed something no child should ever see, and something in her shattered. Muggle boys, having seen her perform accidental magic, attacked her in fear and cruelty. The trauma left her mind fragile, her power uncontrollable. Her bursts of magic became violent storms, unpredictable and dangerous. To protect her, the Dumbledores withdrew from society, but isolation breeds secrets, and secrets breed sorrow. Percival, unable to bear the injustice, retaliated against the Muggle attackers. His act of vengeance cost him everything. Imprisoned in Azkaban, he never revealed the true reason for his crime. To protect Ariana's condition from public scrutiny, he chose disgrace over exposure, knowing the wizarding world's judgment would destroy his daughter. From that day forward, the Dumbledores were marked not by glory, but by grief. Kendra, proud and protective, bore the burden alone. She moved her family away, concealing Ariana from the world. Albus, the eldest, was brilliant beyond measure, a prodigy destined for greatness. At Hogwarts, his mind soared. His teachers spoke of him with awe. Yet behind the accolades, a gnawing resentment grew. He longed for freedom, for recognition, for a life unbound by tragedy. Every letter home reminded him of the chains his family's sorrow had forged. When Kendra died suddenly in a mysterious explosion of magic, Albus returned home, his brilliance dimmed by grief. He was only 18, already a scholar, yet still a boy tethered to pain. There, amid the ruins of his family's happiness, fate introduced him to a name that would change everything: Gellert Grindelwald. But that is a story for the next night, the story of friendship that burned like fire and ambition that turned to ash. For now, we leave young Albus standing in the quiet streets of Godric's Hollow, staring at the gravestones of his mother and father, unaware that the choices he was about to make would ripple across generations. He was destined to become the greatest wizard of his time, but first, he would have to survive himself. The summer after Kendra Dumbledore's death was heavy with silence. Godric's Hollow, once a sanctuary of peace and secrecy, had become a tomb of regret. Inside the modest home, dust settled where laughter used to live. Aberforth nursed his bitterness. Ariana drifted between calm and chaos. And Albus, brilliant, wounded, and restless, found himself standing at a crossroads. He was barely of age, yet already the envy of his peers. Letters from across the wizarding world arrived daily. Offers to teach, invitations to study ancient magic, proposals from institutions eager to harness his intellect. But every parchment that arrived reminded him of what he could not escape: duty. He was trapped in the role of caretaker, his future devoured by responsibility. And then fate knocked on his door. That knock belonged to a boy who would change everything. Gellert Grindelwald. The name, at that time, meant little to the world, but to Albus it would soon mean everything. Grindelwald was not like anyone he had ever met. Sharp, magnetic, and hungry for greatness, he radiated a confidence that mirrored Albus's own secret ambitions. He was a student expelled from Durmstrang for dark experiments, but he spoke of his rebellion not with shame, but with conviction. His mind was a storm, brilliant, dangerous, intoxicating. When they met, it was not simply friendship that sparked between them, it was recognition. Two prodigies bound by intellect and longing, drawn together by shared belief that the wizarding world was broken, that it needed guidance, order, and vision. Both were idealists, both were dreamers, and both believed that power in the right hands could heal what ignorance had ruined. Days turned into nights of endless conversation. They walked the fields of Godric's Hollow, debating philosophy, destiny, and the nature of magic itself. Together they imagined a new world, one where wizards no longer hid in fear of muggles, where magic ruled openly, wisely, and justly. Grindelwald called it for the greater good, and Albus, young and dazzled, agreed. But it was not only ideas that bound them. There was affection, deep and electric, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. For the first time, Albus felt seen. Grindelwald admired not the legend, but the mind, not the power, but the potential. And in that admiration, Albus found both liberation and danger. Yet, within the house, Aberforth saw the truth that Albus could not. He watched his brother drift further from Ariana, from duty, from compassion. The plans of world transformation that filled Albus's days were dreams too distant to recognize the fragile reality of their sister's suffering. While the two young men spoke of conquering destiny, Ariana's magic grew wild and desperate, crying out for attention that never came. It was only a matter of time before the storm broke. Grindelwald's ideas began to darken. He spoke of control, of sacrifice, of destiny's chosen few who must shape the world through force, if necessary. He spoke with the same fire that once inspired Albus, now burning too hot, too bright. Albus, brilliant but naive, believed he could guide him, that intellect could temper ambition. But intellect is not always wisdom, and love is not always enough to save the one you admire. The friendship that began in wonder was sliding toward tragedy, and in its shadows, the seeds of Dumbledore's greatest regret were taking root. For soon, one act, one confrontation, would change all their lives forever. The summer sun hung low over Godric's Hollow that day, though its warmth never reached the Dumbledore home. Inside, the air was brittle with tension, the kind that hums before disaster. Grindelwald's visits had become more frequent, his ideas more consuming. Albus spoke with the feverish energy of a man who believed destiny itself had chosen him. Aberforth, silent but seething, watched it all unravel. Ariana, pale and trembling, had grown restless again. Her magic, uncontrolled, wild, surged whenever voices rose. She could sense the storm brewing long before it struck. That morning, Grindelwald arrived with eyes alight and purpose sharp as steel. He brought plans, maps, parchments, and spells, older than Hogwarts itself. His latest dream, to find the Deathly Hallows, 3 relics said to make their master conqueror of death and lord of magic. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak of Invisibility, and together symbols of power absolute. Grindelwald believed they were destined to find them. Together, he said, we could unite the wizarding world. We could end centuries of fear. Albus hesitated. The words stirred something deep within him, a longing he had buried beneath duty. He imagined it, a world rebuilt through reason, led by visionaries instead of politicians. For a moment he believed again that power, when guided by wisdom, could be mercy. But Aberforth's voice cut through the illusion. "You talk about changing the world," he said bitterly, "but you can't even care for your own sister." The room fell silent. Grindelwald's smile vanished. Albus turned, face flushed, torn between pride and shame. Aberforth stepped forward, fists trembling. "You'll leave her behind for your greater good. You've already left her once." Grindelwald's eyes darkened. "You don't understand greatness," he hissed. "You cling to your small life, your small fears. Men like us—" Aberforth didn't let him finish. "Men like you destroy everything they touch." It was then the spark ignited. Spells flared, light and shadow colliding in the narrow room. Albus tried to stop them, shouting for peace, but his words drowned beneath the thunder of magic. Grindelwald's fury was unrestrained. Aberforth's pain was pure and desperate. And Ariana, terrified, her power spiraling beyond control, joined the chaos. 3 wands flashed, 3 voices cried out, and then silence. When the dust cleared, Ariana lay still. Her eyes were open, unseeing. The air crackled with what was left of her magic, raw, untethered, fading like the last echo of a scream. No one knew whose spell had struck the fatal blow. Grindelwald fled that night, vanishing into legend. Aberforth, broken by grief, turned on his brother with hatred so fierce it would never fade. And Albus, the brilliant, idealistic young man who dreamed of a better world, was left kneeling beside the body of the sister he had failed to protect. That day, Dumbledore's fire turned to ash. He buried his ambition beside Ariana. He built walls around his heart that would never fully crumble. The young visionary who once sought to reshape the world now understood the danger of power, untempered by love. Years later, when people spoke of Albus Dumbledore as the greatest wizard of his age, few knew the truth, that his greatness was born not of triumph, but of guilt. The man who would one day defeat Grindelwald and guide generations of young witches and wizards began his long road to redemption that day in a small house filled with silence and loss. And though the world moved on, Albus never truly did. Every victory, every act of wisdom, every moment of kindness that followed, all of it was penance. After Ariana's death, Albus Dumbledore vanished from the public eye. For nearly a year, no owl, no friend, no colleague could find him. The boy genius of Hogwarts, once destined to become the youngest professor in its history, had retreated into the shadows. A man haunted not by the ghosts of others, but by the one he carried inside himself. When he finally resurfaced, it was not as the prodigy who had once dazzled the wizarding world, but as a scholar, quieter, older in spirit, and cloaked in humility. Gone was the firebrand idealist who had debated philosophy under the stars with Gellert Grindelwald. In his place stood a man who sought truth not through domination, but through understanding. He returned to Hogwarts, the place that had once been his sanctuary. The castle welcomed him like an old friend, its corridors whispering familiar secrets, its portraits murmuring with curiosity. Many expected him to rise quickly through the ranks, perhaps even challenge for Minister of Magic one day. But Albus refused. Power, once his obsession, now repelled him. He chose instead the quiet life of teaching. To those who watched him at the front of his classroom, wand tracing elegant arcs through the air, it was clear he possessed brilliance unmatched. Yet behind every smile there lingered sorrow. He taught transfiguration not as mere technique, but as philosophy, the art of change, the beauty of transformation, the necessity of balance. Students adored him. They saw wisdom in his gentleness, humor in his restraint, and mystery in his silences. But only a few suspected how much pain shaped that kindness. Every time he praised a student's curiosity, he saw himself as he once was, eager, arrogant, blind. And every time he warned against the misuse of power, he heard Grindelwald's voice echoing softly, for the greater good. Letters arrived from the ministry often, offering positions of prestige, department head, chief warlock, even early talks of minister. Dumbledore declined them all. To most, it seemed eccentricity or modesty. In truth, it was penance. He knew the cost of ambition. He would never let it consume him again. Yet, though he sought peace, peace did not always seek him. Rumors of Grindelwald's rise began to spread like dark fire across Europe. The boy who had fled Godric's Hollow had become a man of terrifying charisma. He was gathering followers, witches and wizards disillusioned with secrecy, hungry for order, and eager to reclaim what they saw as their birthright. His movement was spreading across borders, subtle and strategic, like smoke filling a room. And every time Dumbledore read a headline, every time he saw the name Grindelwald, the wound reopened. He knew better than anyone that the foundation of Gellert's revolution was built upon the ideals they had once shared. For the greater good, the words that had once felt noble now tasted like ash. Still, Dumbledore did not move against him, not yet. Some say it was cowardice, others say wisdom, but perhaps it was something deeper, love's final illusion that the person you once knew might still be saved. In the years that followed, Dumbledore became not just a teacher, but a quiet architect of hope. He guided generations of young minds, teaching them that true strength came not from dominance, but from mercy. His office filled with curious objects, each with a story. His desk with letters from students who would later become legends in their own right. But in the stillness of night, when the castle slept and the moonlight poured through the high windows, he would sit alone, turning an old photograph in his hand. Two young men standing together, eyes alight with dreams of a better world. One had become a savior, the other a shadow. And Dumbledore, the man caught between them, could never escape the question that haunted him still. At what point does vision become tyranny? And who decides when good becomes too great? He would one day find his answer, but before that reckoning, the darkness he thought he had left behind would rise again. And this time it would come for the entire world. By the time whispers of Grindelwald's war began to spread across Europe, Albus Dumbledore had already built his reputation as Hogwarts' most beloved professor. To the outside world, he was a man of patience and wit, a teacher whose mind held the very architecture of magic itself. But inside, the storm he had long tried to silence was awakening. The newspapers called it the rise of the New Order. In distant lands, wizarding communities fell under the shadow of a brilliant leader who spoke of unity, destiny, and freedom from Muggle secrecy. His followers, the acolytes of the greater good, moved like a tide across the continent, capturing magical relics, overthrowing ministries, rewriting the laws of wizard kind. They did not see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as liberators. And their leader, the world soon learned, was Gellert Grindelwald. When Dumbledore read the first confirmed reports, an uprising in Bavaria, a ministry official found dead with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows carved into his door, he felt the old weight return to his chest. The world believed Grindelwald had been born from chaos, from ambition, but Dumbledore knew better. He had been born from dreams, their dreams, twisted by the fire of arrogance. Still, Albus remained silent. To act against Grindelwald would mean confronting not only his former friend, but the part of himself that had once believed in the same ideals. He watched, waiting, hoping perhaps that the tide would turn on its own. But tides do not reverse by wish alone. The year 1926 marked the turning point. Cities burned in secret. Entire magical communities vanished overnight. It was not yet open war, but it was war all the same, the kind that spread through fear and persuasion. Grindelwald's rhetoric was intoxicating. He spoke of a world without hiding, without shame. Wizards, he said, had a duty to lead, to save humanity from itself. And across the world, thousands believed him. Hogwarts remained untouched, a sanctuary above the storm. But even within its walls, the whispers grew. Students arrived from families divided by ideology, some who idolized Grindelwald's vision, others who feared it. Dumbledore saw in their debates the same fire that had once consumed his youth. He saw how easily brilliance could be seduced by purpose. Late one evening in the headmaster's office, Phineas Nigellus Black's portrait sneered at him. "You taught him how to think," the portrait said softly. "You made him dangerous." Dumbledore did not argue. He simply turned away. Then came the letters, desperate, pleading. Old friends from the European ministries wrote for help. Some begged Dumbledore to intervene. Others demanded to know why he hadn't already. His answer never changed. "I cannot," he would write, "not yet." Few understood the true reason behind his hesitation. Years earlier, when he and Grindelwald had first sought the Hallows, they had forged a blood pact, a magical bond that prevented them from ever attacking each other. To break it would require a power greater than either possessed. Thus, Dumbledore was bound not only by guilt, but by magic itself. Yet even that, he knew, was only part of the truth. The deeper truth, the one he could never confess, was that a part of him still loved the man Grindelwald had once been. To destroy him meant destroying what little remained of the person Dumbledore had once been himself. And so, as the world descended into chaos, Dumbledore waited. He taught his students to think freely, to question power, to act with compassion, as though preparing them for a war they could not yet see. He turned Hogwarts into a forge of wisdom in a time of rising ignorance. Outside the castle walls, the shadows lengthened. In Nurmengard, Grindelwald built his fortress of black stone, a monument to order and destiny. His followers called him the bringer of a new dawn. To others, he was already a legend, half messiah, half monster. The storm had gathered, and the man who could stop it was still standing in the eye of it, waiting, torn between duty and the ghost of the boy he once loved. The summer of 1927 began with silence, the kind of silence that exists before an earthquake. Across Europe, the wizarding world held its breath. Grindelwald's forces had claimed Austria. The International Confederation of Wizards was in chaos. Rumors spread like smoke that Dumbledore had once been Grindelwald's friend, and worse, that he had taught him everything he knew. In London, the Ministry of Magic held emergency meetings, each ending the same way, with fear and indecision. "Only Dumbledore can stop him," one voice would insist. And then, inevitably, another would ask the question no one could answer: then why doesn't he? Far from the Ministry's chambers, Dumbledore walked alone along the shores of the Black Lake. The wind carried the scent of water and pine, the same as it had that summer long ago when he and Gellert had once dreamed together. He remembered their laughter, their arguments, the fierce glow of conviction in Grindelwald's eyes. He remembered believing they could change the world. And now the world was burning under that belief. Inside his office, beneath the flickering candlelight, Dumbledore opened a small wooden box. Inside it gleamed a delicate vial suspended by a chain of silver. Within the vial, swirling like trapped starlight, floated a faint trace of blood. Their blood. The blood pact. The promise that had bound their fates together. He had never shown it to anyone, not even to Newt Scamander, not to the few who still trusted him. The charm was unbreakable, a living covenant that punished betrayal with death. When the pact had been made, it had seemed like a vow of unity. Now it was a curse that chained his soul. He could not raise a wand against Grindelwald. He could not even think of harming him without pain blooming in his chest like fire. Magic that deep was older than Hogwarts itself. Magic of will, of intent, of truth. And Albus Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, could not outthink his own heart. He had kept the pact hidden for years, fearing what it revealed. But the time for secrecy was ending. Reports were coming in faster now. Attacks in Paris, disappearances in Berlin, strange markings appearing in villages across the Rhine. The Hallows symbol, the same mark they had once drawn together in youthful rebellion. Each report was another echo of his past, returning to claim him. That autumn, Dumbledore met with Nicholas Flamel, the legendary alchemist, in a quiet chamber beneath a Parisian apothecary. Flamel's eyes, ancient and gentle, studied him for a long moment before he spoke. "You are not bound by your promise, Albus. You are bound by your fear of what it means to break it." Dumbledore did not answer. Flamel continued softly, "You and Gellert did not create a spell. You created a reflection of your souls. To destroy it, one of you must surrender what he fears most to lose." "What is that?" Dumbledore asked, though he already knew. "Control." When Dumbledore returned to Hogwarts, he was greeted by a letter sealed in black wax. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, familiar, like a whisper from another life. "Albus," it began, "the world is awakening. It is time to choose. You taught me that love was the greatest magic, and it is. But love should not make us weak. It should make us gods. Join me as you were meant to, or stand aside and be swept away with the old world you protect." He read it once, then twice, then placed it in the fire. But even as the parchment curled into ash, he could feel the truth in Grindelwald's words. The love between them had never died. It had only changed shape, from warmth to flame, from hope to grief. And still, he could not move against him. So Dumbledore did the only thing he could. He began searching for a way to destroy the pact. Nights turned into weeks, weeks into years. He studied ancient magical contracts, old runes of reversal, forbidden transmutations whispered only in the oldest corners of the library. But every attempt ended the same. The vial's light dimmed, flickered, and healed itself again. Until one day, while studying a forgotten ritual in a cracked Aramaic manuscript, Dumbledore found a passage that changed everything. "Only a mirror may break a mirror. Only love may unbind what love has bound." It was then he understood. The blood pact could not be destroyed by hatred, nor by reason. It could only be undone by the same force that had forged it, by love itself. But love to Dumbledore had always brought ruin. Still, for the first time in years, he felt a spark of something ancient stirring within him. Hope. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. The year was 1945, the year history would remember as the end of a world war among Muggles. But in the shadow of their battle, another war had been raging, unseen, unrecorded, and far more dangerous. It was a war of wands and whispers, of loyalty and betrayal. It was the war between Grindelwald and Dumbledore, between two men who had once loved each other more deeply than anyone could understand. By then, Grindelwald had become a legend of terror. His fortress, Nurmengard, rose high above the dark forests of Austria, an obsidian tower that scraped the clouds. From its peak, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows gleamed like a burning eye, visible even from miles away. Inside, he gave speeches that made ordinary men believe they were chosen, speeches that turned loyalty into faith. His followers no longer saw him as a wizard. They saw him as destiny itself. And still, Albus Dumbledore waited. To those around him, it looked like cowardice. "You should have stopped him years ago," said Minister Spencer Moon in a stormy council meeting. "You let this monster grow." But Dumbledore said nothing. How could he explain that he could not raise a wand without breaking the very blood magic that bound his soul? Yet something inside him had begun to shift. The discovery of the mirror spell, that cryptic line about love unbinding love, haunted him. Could it truly be that the only way to defeat Grindelwald was to feel again what he had buried long ago? He began to study the old memories, using the pensieve to relive the fragments of their youth. Each memory was a wound. He saw Gellert's laughter under the Godric's hollow sun, the spark in his eyes when he spoke of a world united for the greater good, and the way that spark had darkened into obsession. Dumbledore's reflection in the silver basin looked older now, wearier, but in his eyes there was something new: resolve. The turning point came when news reached Hogwarts that a small wizarding village in Switzerland had been burned to the ground by Grindelwald's army. Dozens dead, families vanished. Among them was a boy no older than 15, who had once written to Dumbledore asking to study at Hogwarts. That was the moment Albus knew he could no longer hide behind the pact. And so he went to the one place he swore he would never return, Godric's Hollow. The house was gone, long burned and rebuilt, but the land still remembered. Beneath the ancient yew tree, he drew a circle of light on the ground and placed the vial of their blood in the center. He closed his eyes and whispered the words of the mirror spell. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly the air shimmered. In the rippling light before him, a familiar face appeared, younger, untouched by time, smiling with that same terrible beauty. "Albus," the reflection said softly, "still bound by your heart?" It wasn't Grindelwald, not really. It was the echo of what once had been. Dumbledore knelt, his voice breaking. "You taught me that love is power. But love does not enslave, it frees." The reflection smiled sadly. "Then prove it." When he opened his eyes, the vial was glowing, not silver, but gold. The light pulsed like a heartbeat. He knew then that the spell had worked. The bond was weakened, if not yet broken. He could face him now. Weeks later, the confrontation everyone had whispered about finally came. The sky above Nurmengard cracked with lightning as two figures appeared on the tower's peak. Dumbledore in robes of deep blue, his wand drawn but trembling slightly in his hand. Grindelwald, calm and radiant, as if greeting an old friend. "So," Grindelwald said softly, "you've come to kill me." "No," Dumbledore replied. "I've come to stop you." Their wands rose as one. The battle that followed would become legend, though no witness lived to tell it truly. The spells they cast shook the air, bending light, warping time. Fire and shadow clashed in a dance of fury and heartbreak. Each movement spoke of everything they had once shared: trust, rivalry, love, and ruin. It was said the duel lasted for hours, that the very mountains trembled. But in truth, it lasted a heartbeat, the longest heartbeat in history. And when it ended, the Tower of Nurmengard stood silent. Grindelwald lay defeated, stripped of his wand, the Elder Wand, and imprisoned in his own fortress. Dumbledore stood over him, eyes filled not with triumph, but sorrow. "I told you," he whispered, "that love would be our greatest weapon." Grindelwald smiled faintly, blood on his lips. "And your greatest weakness." Then he was led away in chains, his voice echoing down the stone halls. Dumbledore remained there for a long time, staring at the sky. The storm was over, but his heart was heavier than ever. He had won. but the cost was unbearable. When he returned to Hogwarts, the students cheered his name. To them, he was a hero. To history, he was a savior. But to himself, he was a man who had finally learned that victory and loss sometimes wear the same face. The year the war ended, the world hailed Albus Dumbledore as a savior. Wizards raised their wands in salute. Newspapers declared the triumph of light, and the ministry named him the greatest duelist of the age. But in the quiet corners of Hogwarts, when the castle slept and the ghosts drifted through its ancient halls, Dumbledore could not escape a truth that haunted him more than any spell. That peace was not the same as redemption. He would stand before the mirror of Erist sometimes, long after midnight. The reflection never changed. He didn't see gold or glory or even Grindelwald in chains. He saw three faces, his sister Ariana, his brother Aberforth, and himself as a boy, before everything went wrong. The night the duel that killed her had shattered them all. That was his true torment, not Grindelwald, not the blood pact, but the ghost of the child he once failed to protect. In public, he smiled. That gentle, wise smile history would come to love. In private, he buried himself in study. He wrote letters to Flamel, argued philosophy with Bathilda Bagshot, and began his quiet watch over a new generation of witches and wizards. But every so often a letter would arrive at his desk, sealed in black wax, with no signature. He never opened them. He didn't have to. He knew who they were from. Grindelwald was alive, imprisoned in Nurmengard, yes, but still powerful in spirit. His followers whispered that he was biding his time, that he had foreseen another rising darkness greater than his own. Dumbledore, for all his intellect, could not dismiss that fear. Years passed, and Hogwarts changed. Children of war became teachers. New students arrived, bright-eyed and unbroken. Yet Dumbledore never forgot that evil does not die. It sleeps, waiting for the world to forget. In 1948, a strange visitor arrived at the castle gates. A tall witch in emerald robes, sharp-eyed and curious, Minerva McGonagall. She had come seeking guidance, and Dumbledore saw something in her, courage tempered by compassion. He began to mentor her, shaping her into the kind of leader he wished he had been in his youth. Through her, he began to rebuild his faith in people, one student at a time. But not all shadows had faded. In 1956, an old wand maker named Gregorovitch was found dead in his shop. The Elder Wand, the same wand Dumbledore had taken from Grindelwald, had disappeared. Rumors swirled. Some said it had returned to its true master. Others whispered it was cursed, that it demanded loyalty through blood. Dumbledore locked the wand away, swearing never to use it unless there was no other choice. He feared it, not for its power, but for what it represented. Every legend of the Deathly Hallows ended in tragedy, and yet, despite everything, he still wore the ring with the crest of the Hallows. A silent confession that part of him still believed. Years turned into decades. Dumbledore became headmaster. His reputation grew into myth. Students whispered stories about his wisdom, his eccentricity, his kindness. Few saw the man behind the myth, the weary soul who still dreamt of a sister's laughter, who still carried letters he never sent, who still wondered if he had truly done the right thing. In 1965, a letter came from Nurmengard. "My old friend," it began, written in a trembling but elegant hand. "The world has forgotten me, as I knew it would. But there is one truth I must leave you before I fade. A shadow rises again in the east, one who seeks what we once sought, the power to master death. You will meet him soon, though not as you expect. Beware the boy who fears love." It was signed simply G. Grindelwald. Dumbledore burned the letter, but the words carved themselves into his heart. Beware the boy who fears love. He didn't understand them then, not fully, But in the years to come, when whispers of a dark wizard named Tom Riddle began to spread, those words would come back to him with chilling clarity. That night, Dumbledore stood again before the mirror of Erist. For the first time, he looked into it without longing. The reflection showed him nothing but himself. Older, wiser, still flawed, but at peace with the truth. He whispered into the silence, "The price of peace is never paid once. It is paid every day we choose compassion over control." Then he turned away, the candlelight catching the silver in his hair. Outside, snow began to fall over the towers of Hogwarts. Quiet, steady, unending. It was a peace that would not last. When Tom Riddle first arrived at Hogwarts, few could have guessed what he would become. He was charming, brilliant, self-contained. A mirror of everything Dumbledore once had been, and everything he feared to see again. The boy possessed a gift that startled even the most seasoned professors. But beneath that brilliance was a void so deep that even Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, could not fill it. Riddle's eyes always held calculation, never wonder. He admired power the way some admired beauty, with hunger, not reverence. He learned quickly, faster than anyone had a right to. He studied not just magic, but people. How they moved, how they trusted, how they broke. And Dumbledore, who had once believed he could see through any mask, realized too late that Tom's greatest magic was his ability to hide his soul behind perfection. It began with small things, questions asked too precisely, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, a fascination with control, with secrets, with immortality. Dumbledore recognized the signs, but he hesitated. He remembered another young man once, brilliant, idealistic, convinced he could reshape the world. He had hesitated then too, and it had cost him everything. Riddle called it studying the limits of life and death. Dumbledore called it what it was, fear. Not fear of death, but fear of vulnerability, fear of love. Grindelwald had once told him that love made wizards weak. Riddle had taken that idea and turned it into a creed. And that was when Dumbledore finally understood Grindelwald's warning. Beware the boy who fears love. By the time Riddle left Hogwarts, his transformation had already begun. He would vanish for years, then return under a new name, one the world would learn to fear, Lord Voldemort. But even before his rise, Dumbledore felt the echo of destiny closing in. He had once sought to master death. Now he would face the man who sought to destroy it. Two reflections of the same wound, one trying to heal it through compassion, the other through conquest. As Voldemort gathered followers, Dumbledore began gathering something far rarer. Faith. Faith in flawed, ordinary people. Faith in courage born not from strength, but from love. He founded the Order of the Phoenix, quietly at first, a handful of witches and wizards who believed that unity, not fear, would win the coming storm. Some called it naive. Dumbledore called it necessary. He had built his empire once on intellect. Now he would rebuild the world on trust. But he knew how dangerous this new darkness was. Voldemort did not seek to rule. He sought to rewrite the meaning of life itself. His obsession with Horcruxes, though still whispered rumor then, reminded Dumbledore too painfully of his own youthful arrogance. To divide the soul, to defy death, was to repeat the oldest of all sins. One night, as lightning cracked over the astronomy tower, Dumbledore confided in an old friend, Nicholas Flamel, still alive through the Philosopher's Stone. "Do you ever tire of eternity?" Dumbledore asked quietly. Flamel smiled, his eyes ancient and kind. "Eternity is only beautiful when it's shared. Alone, it becomes a prison." Dumbledore nodded, hearing more truth in those words than in all the magic he'd ever studied. When he returned to his chambers that night, he opened the drawer that held a small silver vial, the last memory of his sister, preserved not by spellwork, but by will. He watched her smile flicker across the surface of the liquid and whispered, "I understand now, Ariana. To love is not weakness. It is the only defense we ever had." Outside, in the dark forests beyond Hogwarts, a gathering was forming. The first Death Eaters. Their mark burned across the sky for the first time, a skull and serpent shimmering like a curse upon the heavens. The next morning, Dumbledore stood before the Great Hall. The students looked to him not just for wisdom, but for reassurance. His eyes swept the hall, faces young and hopeful, unaware of the storm building beyond those stone walls. He thought of Tom Riddle once more, that lonely boy in the orphanage, asking where he belonged. Perhaps that was the truth of it all. Monsters are not born in darkness, but in neglect. Evil, Dumbledore once said, grows where love has been denied. The world was about to test that belief, because in the shadows of the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort was no longer a rumor. He was becoming history's next great wound. And Dumbledore, weary yet unbroken, would soon face the choice that had haunted him his entire life: whether knowledge could ever truly triumph over love. The First War did not begin with a roar, but with a whisper. No banners were raised, no proclamations made. The darkness crept in quietly, through friendships, through families, through fear. One morning, a wizard would disappear. The next, a neighbor would refuse to speak of it. And before long, the silence itself became a weapon more powerful than any curse. Dumbledore had lived through wars before, but this one was different. This time, the enemy was not across an ocean or behind castle walls. It was in every heart that chose safety over courage. The Death Eaters moved unseen, bound not by loyalty but by the illusion of strength. They believed Voldemort could give them what they desired most: freedom from fear. What they didn't see was that he was fear given form and purpose. And in that growing darkness, Dumbledore stood alone at the center of a storm he had once helped summon. He knew this war was the final echo of his own youthful dreams of control. Grindelwald had sought power for ideology. Voldemort sought it for immortality. But both were born from the same seed, the belief that love could be replaced by order. The Order of the Phoenix began as a flicker of defiance, a group of idealists, dreamers, and outcasts who refused to let terror rule their lives. There was Moody, relentless and scarred, who trusted nothing but vigilance. Minerva, steady as steel, her loyalty sharper than any wand. The young marauders, reckless but brave, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, still too young to understand how fragile heroism could be. And there was Lily Evans, whose compassion burned so bright it illuminated even Dumbledore's wearied soul. He watched them all with quiet sorrow. They reminded him of himself, long ago, before ambition had turned to regret. Yet he also saw in them a hope he had never known, the belief that love itself could be an act of rebellion. The war spread fast. By 1979, Voldemort's shadow covered nearly every corner of the wizarding world. Entire families fell: the McKinnons, the Bones, the Prewetts. Hogwarts became a fortress, its magic tightened by Dumbledore himself. Every hallway, every stone of that castle seemed to hum with protective spells whispered in ancient tongues. But even the strongest enchantments cannot guard against fate. In those years, Dumbledore aged more than time allowed. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, now carried the weight of centuries. Every victory came with loss. Every student he sent into the world carried the risk of never returning. And yet, he continued to believe in kindness, in unity, in the fragile strength of good hearts. It was during this time that a prophecy was whispered through the halls of the Department of Mysteries, words that would bind Dumbledore's destiny to a child not yet born. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. Dumbledore understood the prophecy's cruelty immediately. Prophecy he knew was not fate. It was a mirror, showing people what they feared most, and Voldemort, driven by paranoia, would make the prophecy real through his own choices. When Dumbledore learned that the child might be Harry Potter, something within him changed. The same man who had once believed knowledge was the highest form of power now understood that innocence, fragile, ordinary, uncorrupted, might be greater still. And so he waited, hoping against hope that destiny might show mercy. It did not. The night Lily and James Potter died, the world stood still. Voldemort had fallen, yes, but the cost was unbearable. A mother's love had done what no spell could. And in that infant's cry, left on the doorstep of number 4, Dumbledore heard both the end of one war and the beginning of another. He carried Harry to Privet Drive himself. The rain fell in silver sheets, the stars hidden by grief. He looked down at the child and whispered, "You will live free of this burden for as long as I can protect you." Then he left him there, because to love him openly would have placed the boy in greater danger. It was the cruelest act of love Dumbledore had ever committed. Years later, people would call him the greatest wizard of his age. But that night, under the weight of 1,000 silent regrets, Dumbledore felt like a man who had once promised to protect the world and had failed it again. The war had ended. The rebuilding had begun. But peace, he knew, was only ever a pause, the breath between storms. Because in the ashes of Voldemort's fall, something unseen still lingered. Fragments of a soul that refused to die, scattered like embers waiting for wind. And Dumbledore, though weary, could already feel the cold of the next dawn. They say every legend ends with light, but Dumbledore's story ends with understanding. Not the triumphant kind sung about in halls or written into books, but the quiet kind, born of failure, forgiveness, and the long, unbroken march of time. When Voldemort fell that first night in Godric's Hollow, the wizarding world rejoiced. Children slept without nightmares for the first time in years, but Dumbledore did not celebrate. He sat alone in his office at Hogwarts, the flickering candlelight reflecting off the lenses of his half-moon spectacles, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether he had done enough. The war was over, yet the scars it left ran deep. He knew Voldemort was not truly gone. No evil born of love's absence can vanish so easily. It burrows, waiting. And so Dumbledore prepared for the second act, the one no one saw. He began to watch over Harry Potter from afar, guiding quietly, never fully intervening. He placed his trust in fate and in the boy's heart, even as he feared what the truth might one day demand. Because the truth, Dumbledore knew, was not the prophecy. It was not even Voldemort, it was himself. He had once sought to master death. Then he had sought to atone for it. But in the end, Dumbledore realized he had only ever been walking a circle, each choice echoing the last, each act of love shadowed by loss. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak, the Deathly Hallows were never treasures. They were lessons. 3 mirrors showing the same truth from different sides. That power, immortality, and invisibility mean nothing without the courage to love and let go. And so, in the twilight of his life, Dumbledore did something extraordinary. He chose to die on his own terms. When the cursed ring, the Resurrection Stone, burned his hand, he understood the cost instantly. The curse would spread, slowly but surely, and so he confided in Severus Snape, the one man he trusted not for purity, but for pain. Together they built a plan, not to save him, but to protect Harry. to preserve the fragile line between sacrifice and survival. He told Snape what no one else would ever hear. When the time comes, you must be the one to end it. Not for hate, but for mercy, and Snape, who had loved Lily Potter with a devotion Dumbledore could never fully name, agreed, not because he wanted to, but because he understood. In those final years, Dumbledore moved through Hogwarts like a ghost made of light. He smiled often, but it was a gentler smile now, one that came from acceptance, not certainty. He mentored Harry, not as a weapon, but as a reflection of hope. He knew the boy would one day walk into death willingly, and he knew that choice, freely made, born of love, would end what he and Grindelwald had begun long ago. And when that night finally came atop the astronomy tower, when the green light burst through the darkness and the Elder Wand fell from his hand, Dumbledore felt no fear. He felt peace, for he had finally understood what no magic could teach, that to die with a heart unbroken by hatred is the truest mastery for death. Years later, when the world rebuilt again and the legends grew, people spoke of Dumbledore as a man of endless wisdom, a hero, a teacher, a saint. But the truth, the secret past, was far simpler and far more human. He was a boy who lost his sister, a friend who loved the wrong man, a scholar who believed he could outthink pain, and at last, a man who learned that love, flawed, painful, mortal, was the only real magic worth keeping. In the quiet after the storm, as Hogwarts stood whole once more, the portraits in the headmaster's office stirred. Dumbledore's painted eyes twinkled, and though the brushstrokes could not capture the warmth of his real voice, they seemed to whisper through the stillness, "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." And so ends the untold story, not of power nor prophecy, but of redemption. The boy who dreamed of mastering death finally learned to cherish life.